Last Sunday's sermon was about the authority of the Bible over the church. And we saw a number of things about the authority of the Scriptures. We saw that the Scriptures, according to Jesus, both the Scriptures that came before Jesus and the ones about Jesus directly, will be our judge on the last day. And that we are accountable to what God says. We're accountable to learn it. We're accountable to believe it. The Bible is our final authority in faith and conduct. So we talked about that, and one question that came up after the service, I wanted to share with you. It came up in conversation, not by text, but with permission, I wanted to share this question with you because I think a lot of people have the kind of experience behind this question and wonder about these things. The question is, what do I do with growing up in a tradition that brought me to Christ, that taught me some very good things, modeled Christian godliness and health, but has some real weaknesses in dealing with the Scriptures? And in this case, the person asking was coming from more a Pentecostal or charismatic background where we have words from the Lord. There's gift of prophecy. There's the Scriptures are not in some features of this movement not closed, but God is still revealing His truth. And so she was wondering, what do I do with my past experience? I don't want to throw it out, but how do I understand this weakness in relation to the Scriptures? This is a very common question, and it's common because, or I should say, it's a common experience. The question isn't asked very often, and it should be asked more. It's an experience of receiving good things from your tradition and also receiving some very weak things. And so you know from my preaching, if we think about the Pentecostal or charismatic tradition, that I'm very hard on this idea of word from the Lord and I'm a prophet, or people claiming the ministry of apostleship and these kinds of things. I'm pretty tough on that group. So let me come at this a little bit differently, because there's another aspect to this that I want you to understand and be aware of. If you think about the original Pentecostal movement in the United States, there's a feature of it that gets forgotten a lot. And that is that the old-time Pentecostals were Bible teachers, very intensive Bible teachers. And their ministries were, they would say, and I think the aspiration was largely met, that they were expositors of the Bible. And so when you went to a Pentecostal church on Sunday, you were in for a sermon, and might even be longer than mine. And it was probably louder and a fair amount of fire and brimstone, but you were going to get Bible. And that remains the case in a lot of the Pentecostal movement and some of the charismatic movement too. I distinguish between the two because the charismatic movement is more of an outgrowth of old-time Pentecostalism. So people date this differently. You might date it from John Wimber in the 1970s and 80s into the 90s. I think most people would agree that the Toronto blessing in the early 1990s, late 80s, early 90s, was certainly a beginning or a strong outgrowth of the charismatic movement. And so there is a distinction between the two. That the charismatic movement of modern times, contemporary times, has tended to be much more experientially based and much less rooted in the scriptures. So the woman who was asking me about her background, she describes what I would call a more traditional Pentecostal background, where yes, there's speaking in tongues, and yes, the services are much more lively, and it is more experientially based, and there is much more of an openness to the leading of the Spirit in the moment, and the fact that God will speak to you, and these kinds of things that I want us to be very careful with. But what she got was the gospel-focused, evangelistic, come to Jesus for the forgiveness of your sins kind of Pentecostalism. And so here's where I want to go with this. When you've had an upbringing or an experience in a tradition that has helped you, and you are coming to the conclusion, yeah, it helped me, but it also kind of steered me off course in some key ways, and maybe it cost me something to be part of that movement. I would just say, don't be too upset about this. This is a common experience. Christians are human beings. Every Christian tradition has profound weaknesses. And the most successful Christian traditions are the ones that understand we've got weaknesses. We have tendencies. There are traps for us, and they address those things. So, for example, the old-time Pentecostal pastors that I've known, and as I've listened to them talk about their pastoring in their churches, much more directive in handling someone who wants to prophesy or speak in tongues in a service. Much more saying, yeah, well, let's hear a little bit of this before it goes out, and we're going to talk with you about what this is on your heart, and we're not just going to hand you the microphone and trust God. There was a determination to use a proper level of pastoral discretion. And I don't think Pentecostals get enough credit for this. The breaks are there, and the pastoring is there. And if you look deep in that movement and read in their literature, their theology is there too, and they have their own disciplines in this. So, okay, you find this is not quite the direction I want to head in my faith. I want to head more in a more rigorously Bible-focused direction. I'm not so convinced about the sign gifts and those things. Okay, then make your decisions and thank God for your tradition. Thank God for the good that you received. Know that any other tradition that you explore is going to have similar traps. So if you were to go, as many charismatics have, if you were to go into the Reformed tradition, where it's very rigorously biblical, theological, and much more intellectually based than experientially based, if you were to go into that tradition, you're going to run into real weaknesses of kind of authoritarian handling of congregations, rigidity, and an inability to change and adapt. And these kinds of things are very harmful to churches, just as harmful in different ways as the weaknesses of Pentecostalism. It's no solution to say, well, I'll just not join any camp. I'll just be a mainstream evangelical. Look, mainstream evangelicalism has its own traps, its own weaknesses. There is no tradition that has everything perfect. So the unhealthy move is to reject what you have received, the people who gave it to you, flawed though they may be, sinful though they may be, to reject them and run as fast as you can in the opposite direction. The healthy move is to say, well, noted, lesson learned. I think I'm going to modify my course here. I'm going to head more in this direction and run some checks as you go. How is this going? What is the impact on the community of these other teachings over here? In other words, you don't have to solve it all. You just need to walk your path through the pretty confusing terrain of Christian teaching today. So when we talk about the Bible having the authority, what I mean by that is the Bible has authority over all the traditions, and the more all of those traditions return to the Bible and check in frequently and deeply, the healthier they are all going to be. And so that's kind of where we're coming from on that question. So as hard as I am on Pentecostal or charismatic traditions, as hard as I am on evangelicalism broadly, understand that we do need to thank God for what we've received and know that the Bible is in charge, the Bible is the authority, and that authority works. It actually does reform us because it is Jesus speaking today.